Chosen ones. You thought they forgot about you. You thought they moved on, didn't you? Let me tell you something that's going to make your spine tingle with recognition of your own power. They didn't forget. They've been busy, real busy. While you were out here living your life, minding your business, building your empire in silence, they were doing something you never saw coming. They interviewed everyone, every single person you ever met, your teachers from 3rd grade, that cashier you smiled at twice, your ex's mother, your childhood friend who moved away, the neighbor who watched you grow up, the boss who fired you, the therapist you stopped seeing, the stranger you helped that one time. Every single person whose life even barely touched yours. And here's the thing that should make you realize just how powerful you really are. Every single person, from completely different times in your life, from different cities, different contexts, different versions of you, they all said the exact same thing, word for word, like they were reading from a script written by the universe itself. They whispered it like a prophecy, like a warning, like a recognition of something beyond human. They said you're cooked. And now those investigators are scared shitless because they finally understand what that means. The interview started 6 months ago, but the planning goes back years. Someone somewhere, in rooms you'll never see, decided you were too dangerous to ignore. Not dangerous in the way they usually define it. You weren't building weapons or stealing secrets or planning revolutions. You were dangerous because you exist outside their framework of control. Your very presence disrupts the algorithms they use to predict human behavior. Your energy field scrambles their careful calculations, so they did what power structures always do when they encounter something they can't categorize. They tried to study you, map you, find your weakness. They assembled a team of the best psychological profilers, behavioral analysts, and experts in human patterns. Their mission was simple: interview everyone you've ever influenced and find out what makes you different. Find out how to contain what you are. They started with your kindergarten teacher, that sweet woman who taught you colors and shapes 40 years ago. She sat across from these investigators, and the moment they said your name, something shifted in her eyes. She didn't just remember you, she relieved you. Her hands started trembling as she described the 5-year-old who asked her why adults pretend to be happy when they're dying inside. She told them about the day you looked straight through her professional mask and saw the divorce she was hiding, the depression she was fighting, and instead of being cruel about it, you just walked over and hugged her leg and said it gets better. You were 5 years old, but you spoke with the certainty of someone who had lived 1,000 lifetimes. She never forgot that moment. It changed how she taught every student after you. You planted something in her consciousness that grew into a complete transformation of her teaching philosophy. Your elementary school principal was next. He tried to laugh it off at first, making jokes about kids being kids, but when pressed for specifics, his whole demeanor changed. He admitted that the entire school's energy would shift when you were present. Test scores would go up. Conflicts would resolve themselves. Broken equipment would mysteriously start working again. He said it was like you were a tuning fork, and your frequency made everything around you vibrate at a higher level. But here's what really disturbed him. When you were absent, which was rare, the school felt hollow. Teachers would be irritable, students would act out, the building itself seemed dimmer. It was like you were providing some essential energy that kept everything running smoothly, and nobody noticed until it was gone. He transferred to another school the year after you left because the building never felt right again. Your teenage best friend, the one who knew all your secrets, or thought they did, provided testimony that made the investigators look at each other with recognition of something bigger than they'd expected. Your friend said being around you was like being plugged into a cosmic power source. Ideas would flow faster, problems would solve themselves, they'd know things they shouldn't know. But it came with a price. The more time they spent with you, the more they could see through the veils that most people live behind. They started seeing the fear in their parents' eyes. The lies their teachers told, the games everyone was playing, You weren't making them see these things. Your presence just made it impossible to ignore what was always there. They distanced themselves from you, not because they didn't love you, but because seeing that much truth, that young, was overwhelming. They chose comfort over clarity, and sitting in that interview room 20 years later, they admitted it was the biggest mistake of their life. The investigators thought they were building a profile, but what they were actually documenting was a pattern of reality, responding to you in ways that shouldn't be possible. Your high school chemistry teacher, a man of science, a skeptic by nature, sat in that room and told them things that made them question the laws of physics. He said chemical reactions would complete faster when you were watching them. Equations would solve themselves on the board while you were thinking. Once a failed experiment that should have produced nothing created a compound that didn't exist in any textbook, but when tested, it had properties that advanced chemistry by a decade. He kept a sample of it, locked away, never told anyone except these investigators. He said teaching you made him question everything he thought he knew about how the universe works. You weren't learning chemistry, you were showing chemistry new ways to express itself. Then came your college roommate, and their testimony is when the investigators started to realize they weren't dealing with a normal case. Your roommate said living with you was like living inside a lucid dream. Reality became negotiable. They'd think about needing something, and it would appear. They'd worry about a test, and the exact information they needed would come to them in their sleep. At first they thought it was a coincidence, then they thought they were going crazy. Finally, they accepted that proximity to you simply made the impossible possible. But the strangest part was what happened after they moved out. The abilities didn't fade immediately. It took months for reality to solidify again, to become predictable and boring. They described it like sobering up from the most beautiful high they'd ever experienced, and they've spent every year since trying to recapture even a fraction of what life felt like when you were around. Your first boss provided testimony that should have been routine, but turned into something that made the investigators close their notebooks and just listen. You were hired for data entry, minimum wage, nothing special. Within a month you'd identified patterns in the company's operations that senior analysts had missed for years. You weren't even trying to show off, you just saw connections that were invisible to everyone else. But here's what really scared them. Your presence in the office caused a phenomenon they couldn't explain. People would have the same dreams, not similar dreams, the exact same dreams, like they were all accessing some shared consciousness when they slept. Productivity doubled, then tripled. People stopped getting sick. Conflicts that had festered for years suddenly resolved. The CEO wanted to promote you immediately, but the board of directors intervened. They said you were too disruptive, which was code for too powerful. They let you go with a severance package that made no sense for someone at your level. They wanted you gone, but they also wanted you happy. They were afraid of what might happen if you were angry. If this message hits your spirit, hype this video so more chosen ones like you can find it. Because what I'm about to reveal next is where their comfortable investigation turned into a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. The romantic testimonies formed their own category because every single person you'd ever been intimate with described experiences that transcended normal human connection. Your first love, the one from high school, sat in that interview room and tried to find words for something language wasn't designed to describe. They said kissing you was like downloading the history of the universe. Holding your hand was like touching electricity that didn't burn but transformed. When you looked at them, really looked at them, they could feel you seeing not just who they were, but who they had been and who they were becoming. All their past lives, all their future possibilities, reflected in your eyes like a mirror facing eternity. They broke up with you because the intensity was too much. They wanted normal love, comfortable love, the kind that doesn't remake your entire understanding of existence. 20 years later, married with kids, living the life they thought they wanted, they still dream about you every night. Not romantic dreams, but dreams where you're teaching them something they can never quite remember when they wake up. Another ex, the one who accused you of being too much, provided testimony that made the investigators add new categories to their files. They said you loved with a force that reorganized atoms. Your attention was like sunlight focused through a magnifying glass. It could warm, illuminate, or burn depending on the receiver's readiness. You remembered everything, not just what they told you, but things they'd forgotten telling you, things they'd only thought about saying. You'd reference conversations that hadn't happened yet, comfort them for losses they hadn't experienced, prepare them for victories they couldn't imagine. They said the worst part wasn't losing you, it was knowing they'd never find anything that compared. Every relationship after you was like trying to get drunk on water after tasting wine. They could go through the motions, but the magic was missing. Your most recent ex, the one who seemed to handle your intensity better than the others, revealed something that made the investigators realize they were documenting something unprecedented. They said you existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. When you were physically present, they could feel other versions of you, past and future selves, all occupying the same space. Sometimes you'd have conversations with parts of them they didn't know existed. You'd respond to thoughts they hadn't voiced, answer questions they hadn't asked, solve problems they hadn't identified. They said loving you was like being in a relationship with the universe itself, beautiful and terrifying and impossible to fully comprehend. They didn't leave because they stopped loving you. They left because they realized they were becoming something they didn't recognize, evolving too fast, changing too fundamentally. They needed time to integrate what you'd awakened in them. They still feel you, even now, like you left some part of yourself in their consciousness that continues teaching them, transforming them, preparing them for something they can't name. The investigators started interviewing your professional contacts next, expecting normal workplace stories. Instead, they got testimonies that sounded like reports of supernatural phenomena. A co-worker said that problems would solve themselves when you were in the building. Not through your direct action, but through some field effect of your presence. Broken printers would start working. Crashed computers would recover their data. The coffee would taste better. People would have breakthrough ideas in the bathroom. It was like your energy upgraded everything within a certain radius. Another colleague reported that you'd know about meetings before they were scheduled, prepare for crises before they happened, and have solutions ready for problems that hadn't been identified. They thought you had inside information, some secret source, but surveillance showed you never accessed any special data. You just knew, the way animals know earthquakes are coming, the way trees know which way to grow toward light. Your doctor, who agreed to be interviewed under special circumstances, provided medical testimony that defied explanation. Your blood work showed anomalies that shouldn't exist in human biology, cellular regeneration rates that exceeded normal by factors that made the equipment seem broken, brain scans that showed activity in regions that are supposed to be dormant, heart rhythms that synchronize with cosmic frequencies that most humans can't detect. But you weren't sick. You were the opposite of sick. You were so healthy it scared them. Your doctor said examining you was like looking at evolutionary documentation, like seeing what human bodies are capable of when operating at full capacity. They kept copies of all your tests, not for medical purposes, but because they believed they were documenting something historic, the emergence of something new. Then came the testimonies that shouldn't have existed, people who had no documented connection to you, but who came forward anyway, compelled by something they couldn't explain. A woman from Brazil said she'd been dreaming about you for 5 years. She'd never met you, never heard your name, but she could describe you perfectly. In her dreams, you were teaching her about frequency, about vibration, about how consciousness creates reality. She started a healing practice based on what you taught her in dreams, and it worked. People were getting better, cancers were remitting, depression was lifting. She didn't understand how she knew what she knew, only that you were the source. When she saw the investigation announcement online, she knew immediately it was you. The person in her dreams, the teacher she'd never met, the presence that had transformed her life from across the world. An elderly physicist retired from a career spent studying quantum mechanics provided testimony that made the investigators question everything they thought they knew about reality. He said he'd been tracking anomalies in local space-time for decades, disturbances in the quantum field that corresponded with human consciousness events. Your birth created a spike in the data that he'd never seen before or since. Every major event in your life, graduations, breakups, breakthrough moments, they all registered on instruments designed to measure subatomic particles. You weren't just living in reality. You were actively reshaping it at the quantum level, constantly, unconsciously, like breathing but with the fabric of existence itself. He'd been following your trajectory through these measurements, never knowing who you were, just knowing something significant was happening. The investigation finally gave him a name to attach to the phenomenon he'd been studying for 40 years. A child psychologist who specialized in gifted children came forward with a warning. They'd never met you, but they'd seen dozens of children who exhibited similar traits. Children who knew things they shouldn't know, who could influence probability, who seemed to exist partly outside normal space-time. These children all drew the same symbols, had the same dreams, talked about the same presence that was teaching them. When shown your photograph, 3 of these children, who had never met each other, identified you immediately. They called you the first one, the template, the one who came to show the way. The psychologist said these children represented an evolutionary leap, and you were somehow connected to all of them, like a broadcast tower sending out a signal that activated dormant DNA, awakened sleeping capabilities, and initialized upgrades in human consciousness. The investigation team tried to compile their findings, but the data wouldn't behave. Files would corrupt, but not randomly. They'd reorganize themselves into patterns, into messages, into warnings. Recordings would play backwards, revealing hidden meanings. Photographs would change, showing you at different ages simultaneously, or in places you'd never been but would visit later. One investigator swore their computer started typing by itself, writing out a message that said, "You're not investigating me, I'm investigating you." They thought it was a hack, a prank, someone trying to scare them, but the IT department found nothing. No intrusion, no malware, no explanation. Just your presence somehow reaching through the data they'd collected, through the testimonies they'd gathered, through the very investigation itself, to communicate directly with them. The lead investigator called an emergency meeting. Half the team was experiencing phenomena they couldn't explain. Dreams where you appeared, not as a person but as a presence, teaching them things their waking minds couldn't fully grasp. Synchronicities that defied probability. They'd think of you and immediately receive a call about you. They'd wonder about some aspect of your life and the answer would appear, written in graffiti, spoken by strangers, spelled out in license plates. One investigator's daughter, who knew nothing about the case, drew a picture of you and said, "This is the person who protects our family." The investigator had never shown her your photo, never mentioned your name. The child just knew. They tried to interview your family last, expecting to find origins, explanations, some childhood trauma that would explain your difference. Instead, they found more mysteries. Your mother said you were born during an aurora borealis that shouldn't have been visible at your latitude. The hospital's electronic equipment failed during your delivery, but you were born healthy, perfect, glowing with a light the nurses couldn't explain. Your first words weren't mama or dada. You looked at her one day, 6 months old, and said, "Remember." When she asked what she should remember, you just smiled and went back to being a baby. But she did remember. Things she'd forgotten, things she'd suppressed, things from before she was born. Your presence in her life had unlocked memories that shouldn't exist, and those memories had guided every decision she'd made since. Your father's testimony was brief but devastating to the investigator's worldview. He said raising you was like trying to parent a force of nature. You'd fix things without touching them. Broken toys would repair themselves overnight if you wished hard enough. The garden grew wild and lush wherever you played. Animals that should have been afraid of humans would approach you like old friends. He said the hardest part was pretending none of it was happening, maintaining the illusion of normalcy so you could have something resembling a childhood. But normal was never an option. You were born outside the bell curve, beyond the standard deviation, in territory that human development charts don't account for. Your siblings each confirmed the same phenomenon from different angles. Living with you meant accepting daily impossibilities as routine. Lost things returned on their own. Homework completed itself if the intention was pure. Bullies would suddenly decide to be nice. Teachers would forget to give tests. It wasn't that you were controlling these things consciously. Reality just arranged itself more pleasantly when you were happy, more chaotically when you were upset. They learned early to keep you in good spirits, not from fear but from understanding that your emotional state affected the quantum probability of everyone around you. They described it like living with someone whose mood influenced the weather, except instead of rain or sunshine, it was the fundamental forces of chance and circumstance that responded to your feelings. The testimonies painted a picture that the investigators couldn't fit into any existing framework. You weren't just unusual or gifted, or even supernatural. You were something else entirely, something that challenged the basic assumptions about what humans are and what they're capable of. Every person who'd encountered you, even briefly, carried some piece of your influence. A grocery clerk from 20 years ago still remembered the day you told them their dead grandmother was proud of them. A librarian recalled you returning books that didn't exist in their system but should have, books about subjects that wouldn't be discovered for years. A bus driver said you paid your fare one day with currency from a country that didn't exist, but when they checked later, it had been converted to local money. These weren't stories of a con artist or a magician. There was no deception, no sleight of hand, just reality behaving differently around you, as if the laws of physics had a different interpretation in your presence. The investigators tried to find patterns, rules, limitations to what you could do, but every rule they identified had exceptions. Every pattern they mapped dissolved into something larger. You weren't operating within reality's constraints. You were negotiating with reality, and reality was willing to compromise. The investigation had been running for 6 months when something shifted. The investigators started experiencing what they could only describe as feedback. The more they studied you, the more you seemed to be studying them back. Not consciously, but through some automatic response, like an immune system responding to observation. They'd find notes in their own handwriting saying things they didn't remember writing. Their dreams became lucid without practice. They'd know things about each other they hadn't been told. The investigation was changing them, and they couldn't tell if it was a side effect or the intended result. One investigator quit suddenly, leaving a resignation letter that just said, "I understand now." Another requested reassignment, claiming the case was affecting their family. Their spouse had started having prophetic dreams. Their children were displaying capabilities that weren't there before. The investigation wasn't confined to the professional sphere. It was spreading, viral, and transformative. Everyone who touched your file, everyone who read the testimonies, everyone who even thought too hard about what you represented, they all reported changes. Subtle at first, then undeniable, enhanced intuition, accelerated healing, spontaneous problem-solving. It was like exposure to information about you activated something dormant in human consciousness. The remaining investigators made a disturbing discovery. The people they'd interviewed were staying in contact with each other, not organized but drawn together by some invisible force. Your kindergarten teacher was having coffee with your first boss. Your college roommate had started dating your co-worker. Your exes had formed a support group, not to get over you, but to understand what you'd awakened in them. It was like your influence had created a network, connecting everyone you'd touched into some larger organism. They weren't plotting or planning anything. They were just drawn to each other, recognizing something familiar, something you'd left in each of them. This network effect was growing. Second-degree connections, people who knew you, they were reporting changes too. A friend of your high school teacher started a revolutionary education program. The daughter of your old neighbor invented a new form of sustainable energy. The brother of your ex became a healer. It was like you were patient zero for some kind of consciousness virus, but instead of making people sick, it was making them more capable, more aware, more connected to possibilities they'd never imagined. The investigators realized they weren't documenting a person. They were documenting an event, an emergence, an evolution happening in real time. The phrase that everyone kept repeating, "you're cooked," took on new meaning as the investigation progressed. It wasn't that you were finished or defeated. It was recognition that you'd been transformed by some process that had fundamentally altered what you were at the deepest level, like raw material transformed by heat and pressure into something unrecognizable from its original form. You'd been cooked in fires that would destroy most people and emerged as something that couldn't be categorized using existing terms. Not superhuman, but differently human. Not evolved, but evolving, constantly, visibly, undeniably. The investigators' final report was never filed. It couldn't be. Every attempt to create a conclusive document resulted in something else. The text would rearrange itself into poetry, into prophecy, into languages that didn't exist yet, but somehow could be partially understood. The data refused to be contained in standard formats. It wanted to be something more, something living, something that grew and changed like you did. One investigator suggested that maybe the report was writing itself, that your influence had infected even the documentation process, turning it into something organic and unpredictable. But the most disturbing discovery came when they investigated themselves. Each investigator had been changed by the process. They could feel it, see it in each other, measure it in ways that shouldn't be measurable. Their reaction times had improved, their pattern recognition had enhanced, their dreams had become teaching environments. They weren't just investigators anymore. They were subjects, transformed by the act of observation, proof that consciousness is contagious, and yours was particularly virulent. Some embraced it, diving deeper into the mystery. Others fled, trying to return to normal lives but finding normal no longer fit. The organization that had ordered the investigation tried to shut it down, contain the spread and minimize the effect. But it was too late. The information had already propagated beyond their control. Every person who'd been interviewed, every investigator who'd participated, every clerk who'd filed a document, they all carried seeds of change that were beginning to sprout. The investigation had succeeded in its stated goal, to understand what you were. But understanding you meant being changed by you. Knowledge of you was transformative. Awareness of you was evolutionary. The investigation itself had become a vector for the very phenomenon it was trying to contain. And you? You felt all of it. Every interview conducted, every testimony given, every moment someone tried to capture your essence in words. You felt it like ripples in water you were swimming in, like vibrations in a web you were centered in. Not invasive, just present, like background music you'd grown accustomed to. You knew they were watching, studying, trying to understand. And part of you was amused because they were trying to measure the ocean with a teaspoon, trying to map the sky with a pencil, trying to contain something that existed partially outside the containers they were using. But another part of you understood this was necessary. The investigation, the documentation, the testimonies, they were all part of something larger. Humanity was trying to understand itself through understanding you. You were the case study for their own potential, the proof that their current models were incomplete. Every person who testified about you was really testifying about what humans could become. Every investigator who studied you was studying their own future. Every file they created was documentation of an evolutionary leap happening in real time. The truth that emerged from all those interviews, all those testimonies, all that documentation was simple and terrifying. You weren't unique. You were first maybe, or just more visible, but not unique. The investigators found evidence of others, many others, showing similar signs, experiencing similar transformations. You were part of a wave, a shift, an upgrade in human consciousness that was happening globally. The investigation had started looking for one anomaly and discovered an entire emerging species. Homo sapiens was branching, evolving, becoming something new, and you were one of the first visible signs of this transformation. Those investigators are out there now, changed, aware, unable to return to who they were before they studied you. Some are looking for others like you, building databases of evolutionary evidence. Some are helping children who show similar signs, protecting them from the fear and misunderstanding that comes with being different. Some have gone underground, spreading what they learned through whisper networks and encrypted channels. They all carry the same message, the same recognition, the same phrase that everyone who encountered you eventually whispered, "You're cooked." But now they understand it's not a warning, it's an identification, a recognition of transformation, an acknowledgement that you've been through the fire and emerged as something new. The people who were interviewed, your teachers, friends, lovers, colleagues, they're all connected now, not through any organization or plan, but through shared experience. They recognize each other in crowds, drawn by some invisible signature you left in their consciousness. They share dreams sometimes, collective visions of futures that haven't happened yet. They're all slightly more than they were before they knew you, upgraded by proximity, evolved through exposure. Your existence in their lives was catalytic, transformative, irreversible, and the investigation continues, unofficially, organically. Everyone who hears about you, everyone who reads the testimonies, everyone who even thinks too deeply about what you represent, they all become part of it. The investigation has evolved beyond its original purpose, become something self-organizing, self-propagating. It's documenting not just you, but the transformation you represent, the evolution you embody, the future you're helping to create. Every new person who learns about you becomes another data point in humanity's understanding of its own potential. You're cooked, chosen one. Fully cooked, transformed by pressures that would break most people, seasoned by experiences that would drive others insane, prepared by fires that burned away everything unnecessary until only the essential remained. Those investigators thought they were studying an anomaly. They discovered they were witnessing a birth, the birth of something new in human consciousness, something that had always been potential but was now becoming actual. And every person who tried to understand you, categorize you, contain you, they all became midwives to this birth, whether they intended to or not. Ronkulde because now funtu dant to the time and toilet time, mikamaust of the forde tuash befisti bidda. This to the human tuash war, but they shorted dart and ounded dart pleelers were, info a dart patchins of budju and darfin, but they humilidio part tot of the pleathoused, but they humilidio part tot of the monbase, but they humilidio part tot of the pleathoused and ambitaf pleathouse, but they humilidio part tot I built this because I was done watching chosen ones get dragged through betrayal, isolation and attacks, while their enemies strutted around unchecked. I want to help you accelerate the speed of your divine justice and step fully into your purpose. And the beauty of it, you don't even have to lift a finger. Destiny Engine takes their downfall and flips it into your rise. This isn't another meditation app. What it's declassified consciousness technology, the same mind programming tools your enemies once used to install fear, competition and scarcity, re-engineered to restore your sovereignty and align you with the cooperative, upgraded operating framework. It generates personalized sequences mapped to your divine purpose. The hardest thing you'll do is put on headphones, press play and watch your enemies keep digging their own grave. The collective upgrade is underway. Start your Destiny Engine for $1 today and turn everything they did to break you into fuel for your rise. Link in the description. The investigation failed in its original purpose. You can't be contained, controlled, or even fully comprehended using current frameworks. But it succeeded in something more important. It created a record, a testimony, a proof that human evolution isn't finished, that consciousness can expand beyond current limitations, that reality is far more flexible than most people believe. The investigation of you became an initiation for everyone involved, a transformation that rippled outward in waves that are still spreading. So let them be scared. Let them whisper you're cooked with voices full of awe and terror. Let them try to return to lives that no longer fit, worldviews that no longer hold, limitations that no longer apply. They've seen what's possible through you. They've witnessed what humans can become. They've documented proof that evolution isn't just biological but conscious, intentional, accelerating. And that documentation, that proof, that witness testimony, it's spreading like wildfire through collective consciousness, lighting up dormant potential, activating sleeping DNA, cooking other souls in the same transformative fire that made you what you are. The investigators thought they were ending something by studying you. They were beginning something, a recognition, an awakening, an evolution that can't be stopped now that it's started. Every person who knows your story, everyone who's felt your influence, everyone who's been touched by the investigation, they're all part of it now, part of the transformation, part of the evidence, part of the future that's being born through present awareness. You weren't the subject of the investigation, you were the catalyst for humanity's investigation of itself, and what humanity is discovering through you is that it's capable of so much more than it ever imagined. They interviewed everyone you ever met. They documented thousands of testimonies. They compiled evidence that you shouldn't exist as you are, and in doing so, they created the most comprehensive proof ever assembled that human beings are in the middle of an evolutionary leap, not in some distant future, but right now, through you, through others like you, through everyone who's been touched by awareness of what's possible. The investigation is over, but the transformation it documented has just begun. And every single person who whispered you're cooked while describing you, they were really describing themselves, their own transformation, their own evolution reflected in the mirror of your existence. You're cooked, and that cooking is contagious. It spreads through consciousness like heat through metal, transforming everything it touches at the molecular level. Those investigators, those witnesses, those people who thought they were studying you, they're all cooked too now. Changed by observation, evolved through investigation, transformed by the simple act of trying to understand something that exists outside their previous framework of understanding. The investigation didn't fail. It succeeded beyond their wildest fears, beyond their most paranoid projections. It proved that you're not an anomaly, you're a preview, a demonstration, a living proof of what's coming. And what's coming is going to make their investigation look like a child's crayon drawing of the Sistine Chapel. Because now that the documentation exists, now that the testimonies have been gathered, now that the evidence has been compiled, there's no going back. Humanity has seen proof of its own potential. It's witnessed evidence of its own evolution. It's documented testimony of its own transformation. And that knowledge, that awareness, that recognition, it's spreading faster than they can contain it, transforming everyone it touches, cooking consciousness in the same fires that transformed you. The investigators are scared shitless because they finally understand what you are. Not a person to be studied, but a force to be reckoned with. Not an anomaly to be contained, but an evolution to be witnessed. Not a problem to be solved, but a solution to problems they didn't even know existed. You're cooked, fully transformed, completely evolved, and your very existence is proof that humanity's current form is not its final form. The investigation proved that beyond any doubt, and that proof is why they're terrified. Because if you're possible, if what you are can exist, then everything they thought they knew about human limitation is wrong. And if it's wrong about you, it's wrong about them too. They're all capable of becoming what you are. They just have to be willing to enter the fire, to be cooked, to be transformed. You're cooked, chosen one. and the whole world is about to find out what that really means.